Rachel sat in her doctor's office for the fourth time in 3 months. 28 years old, marketing director at a tech company, healthy lifestyle, no history of illness. Yet for 6 months, she'd been experiencing symptoms that made no medical sense. Fatigue that sleep couldn't cure. A pressure in her chest that no test could explain. Moments where sounds became unbearably loud, then eerily distant. Her doctor reviewed the blood work again. Perfect. The MRI? Normal. The cardiac tests? Flawless. Rachel, physically, you're completely healthy. Have you considered that this might be anxiety? She had. She'd tried therapy, meditation apps, cutting caffeine, yoga at dawn. Nothing changed. The symptoms weren't going away. They were intensifying. And beneath the physical discomfort was something else, something she couldn't name. A feeling that reality itself had become thin. Like a veil she could almost see through. She felt crazy. She felt broken. She felt utterly alone. Meanwhile, across history, mystics, philosophers, and psychologists had documented this exact phenomenon. Carl Jung called it the integration of the shadow. Ancient yogis called it Kundalini rising. Christian mystics called it the dark night of the soul. The terminology differed, but the experience was identical. The body manifesting what the soul was preparing to reveal. Here's what nobody tells you. Your awakening doesn't begin in your mind. It begins in your body. And your body knows months, sometimes years, before your consciousness catches up. These aren't symptoms of illness. They're symptoms of transformation. And if you're experiencing them right now, you're closer to breakthrough than you realize. Rachel's journey began when her college roommate Sarah visited from California. They hadn't seen each other in 3 years. Over wine on Rachel's balcony, Rachel finally admitted everything. The fatigue, the chest pressure, the strange sensitivity to sound and light, the feeling that she was going insane. Sarah listened quietly. Then, she said something that changed everything. Rachel, I had the exact same thing 2 years ago. Every symptom you just described. I thought I was dying. Turns out, I was being reborn. Sarah had spent 6 months in India studying with a teacher who specialized in what he called consciousness transitions. She'd learned that certain physical symptoms weren't random. They were specific markers of spiritual awakening, documented across cultures and centuries. Carl Jung had studied them extensively. He believed that when the psyche prepared for massive integration, the body responded first. Your body is smarter than your mind, Sarah explained. It knows you're outgrowing your old identity. It's preparing the vessel for what's coming. But because your mind doesn't understand, it interprets the symptoms as illness. Rachel was skeptical. She'd never considered herself spiritual. She was logical, ambitious, practical. But she was also desperate. And something about what Sarah said resonated in a place deeper than logic. What if I told you there are 7 specific symptoms that appear before awakening? Sarah asked. And that understanding them transforms the entire experience. Rachel leaned forward. For the first time in months, she felt something other than fear. She felt curiosity. The first symptom is unexplained fatigue that sleep doesn't cure. Rachel knew this one intimately. She'd sleep 9 hours and wake up exhausted. It wasn't physical tiredness, it was existential. Like her soul was tired of performing, pretending, maintaining a version of herself that no longer fit. Sarah explained that Jung called this the death of the persona. The persona is the mask we wear for the world, the professional identity, the social role, the acceptable self. When awakening begins, the psyche starts withdrawing energy from the persona. You literally become too tired to maintain the performance. Your body forces you to stop performing and start being. It's not that you need more sleep, Sarah said. It's that your energy is being redirected inward for massive internal work. Your consciousness is reorganizing itself. That takes power. Rachel thought about her life. The 12-hour workdays. The networking events where she performed enthusiasm. The relationships where she edited herself to be likable. The constant vigilance required to be the version of Rachel everyone expected. Maybe her body was refusing to keep paying that price. The second symptom is heightened sensitivity to environments and energy. Rachel had noticed this but thought she was just becoming irritable. Crowded places felt overwhelming. Certain people drained her instantly. Fluorescent lights felt aggressive. Noise she used to ignore now felt invasive. "You're not becoming sensitive," Sarah explained. "You're becoming aware." Most people are numb. They've built armor against feeling too much. Awakening strips that armor away. You start feeling what was always there but you'd learned to ignore. Carl Jung wrote about this extensively. He called it the dissolution of psychological defenses. The psyche, preparing for integration, begins removing the protective layers we've built. This makes you raw, vulnerable, hyper-aware. It feels like you're losing your ability to cope. Actually, you're gaining your ability to perceive truth. Rachel remembered last month at her company holiday party. She'd stood in the center of the room, surrounded by colleagues, and suddenly felt like she could see through everyone. The forced laughter, the strategic conversations, the performance of enjoyment. It had felt so hollow she'd had to leave early. She'd thought something was wrong with her. Maybe something was right. The third symptom is the collapse of old belief systems. This one had terrified Rachel most. Things she'd believed her entire life suddenly felt empty-eyed. Success metrics that had driven her now seemed meaningless. Relationships she'd valued felt transactional. Goals she'd worked toward felt hollow. It was like watching the architecture of her entire worldview crumble. "That's the most important symptom," Sarah said. Jung called it the death of the old God. Whatever belief system organized your reality is dying because your consciousness is expanding beyond it. You can't wake up and keep your old dreams. The dreams have to die first. For Rachel, it was the corporate ladder dream. She'd spent 6 years climbing it, believing that the next promotion, the next salary increase, the next title would finally make her feel accomplished. 6 months ago, she'd been promoted to director. She'd felt nothing. The emptiness had been so profound it had frightened her. She'd worked so hard for something that meant nothing. The realization had felt like freefall. "You're not losing meaning," Sarah explained. "You're releasing false meaning, so real meaning can emerge. But there's a gap between the death of the old and the birth of the new. That gap is the dark night of the soul. It's supposed to feel like nothing matters, because what mattered before doesn't matter anymore, and what will matter hasn't revealed itself yet." Rachel felt tears on her face. Someone finally understood. The fourth symptom is physical sensations of energy moving in the body. Rachel had experienced this but never told anyone because it sounded insane. Sometimes she'd feel electricity running up her spine, or pressure at the center of her chest, like something wanted to break through, or heat in her hands for no reason. She'd Googled every medical explanation. None fit. "That's Kundalini," Sarah said, "or Chai, or Prana, depending on the tradition. It's the body's life force energy beginning to move through channels that have been blocked. Western medicine doesn't have a framework for it, so it gets dismissed. But every spiritual tradition on Earth documents it." Jung studied this phenomenon through his work with patients experiencing what he called psycho-spiritual crises. He found that as consciousness expanded, people reported identical physical sensations: heat, pressure, electricity, vibration. These weren't hallucinations. They were the felt experience of energy reorganizing in the body. "Your body is becoming a clearer channel," Sarah explained. "Energy that was stuck is starting to flow. It feels strange because you're not used to it, but it's actually your system returning to its natural state." The fifth symptom is intense, vivid dreams or nightmares. Rachel's dreams had become cinematically intense. She'd wake up feeling like she'd lived an entire other life. Sometimes the dreams were beautiful, transcendent. Sometimes they were terrifying, apocalyptic. She'd started journaling them because they felt important, though she didn't know why. Dreams are the language of the unconscious. Sarah said, Jung believed that awakening is the conscious mind finally meeting the unconscious. Your dreams are intensifying because the unconscious is communicating more directly. It's showing you what you've repressed. what you've denied, what you need to integrate. Rachel thought about last week's dream. She'd been standing in her childhood home, but the walls were transparent. She could see everything, every hidden space, every secret. She'd woken up crying, but didn't know why. Maybe her psyche was showing her that the walls she'd built between who she was and who she pretended to be were dissolving. The sixth symptom is synchronicities that feel impossible to dismiss. Rachel had started noticing them 3 months ago. She'd think of someone, and they'd text within minutes. She'd need an answer, and a book would fall off a shelf open to the exact page. She'd hear the same phrase from 3 different sources in one day. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but it kept happening. The statistical improbability became undeniable. Jung coined the term synchronicity to describe meaningful coincidences that couldn't be explained by causality. He believed they increased during periods of psychological transformation because the boundary between inner and outer reality was thinning. Your consciousness was becoming coherent enough to interact with the field of reality itself. You're not imagining them, Sarah said. Synchronicities are evidence that your consciousness is shifting from separation to connection. You're starting to perceive the web that connects everything. Most people are too fragmented to notice. You're becoming whole enough to see. The 7th symptom is the feeling of going crazy or losing yourself. This was the one that had sent Rachel to doctors repeatedly. Some days she didn't recognize herself. Her interests had changed. Her values had shifted. Her reactions were different. It felt like the person she'd been for 28 years was evaporating, and she didn't know who was replacing her. The disorientation was terrifying. You're not going crazy, Sarah said gently. You're going sane. Jung called this individuation, becoming who you actually are instead of who you were conditioned to be. It feels like losing yourself because the constructed self is dissolving. But that was never your real self. It was the adaptation. What's emerging is the truth. Rachel sat with that. The marketing director who networked aggressively and optimized her LinkedIn and performed ambition at every meeting, that wasn't her. That was the survival strategy she'd built to succeed in a system that rewarded performance. Underneath that was someone quieter, more reflective, more interested in meaning than metrics. That person had been buried so long she'd forgotten she existed. So what do I do? Rachel asked. How do I get through this? Sarah smiled. You stop fighting it. These symptoms aren't the problem. Resistance to them is. Your body is trying to help you transform. Let it. Over the next 6 months, Rachel made changes that would have seemed insane to her old self. She reduced her work hours. She started saying no to networking events. She spent weekends alone, journaling, walking, sitting in silence. She stopped performing. She let herself be tired. She let herself be sensitive. She let herself not know who she was. And slowly, something shifted. The fatigue began to lift, not because she slept more, but because she stopped forcing herself to maintain an identity that exhausted her soul. The sensitivity remained, but she learned to see it as attunement, not weakness. She could feel when situations were nourishing or draining and choose accordingly. The old belief systems didn't come back, but new ones emerged, quieter, truer, rooted in her actual values instead of inherited expectations. The energy sensations in her body became familiar, even comforting. She learned to breathe into them instead of tensing against them. Her dreams continued to be vivid, but she started working with them, asking what they were trying to show her. The synchronicities increased. She began following them like breadcrumbs, trusting that her life was being guided by something larger than her conscious planning. And the feeling of losing herself transformed into the realization that she was finding herself. The constructed Rachel was dissolving. The true Rachel was emerging. They weren't the same person, and that was exactly the point. 10 months after that conversation on the balcony, Rachel sat across from a young woman named Maya in a coffee shop. Maya had reached out through a mutual friend, desperate, experiencing symptoms doctors couldn't explain. Fatigue, chest pressure, sensitivity, The feeling of going crazy. Rachel listened to the familiar story and smiled. "I know this is going to sound strange," Rachel said. "But what if I told you that what you're experiencing isn't illness? What if it's awakening?" Maya's eyes filled with tears. Someone finally understands. Rachel reached across the table and took Maya's hand. There are 7 symptoms that appear before awakening. Understanding them changes everything. Let me tell you what nobody told me. The cycle continues. The wisdom passes on. Now let me ask you something. You've made it this far in this video. That means something inside you recognizes these symptoms. Maybe you're experiencing the unexplained fatigue. Maybe it's the sensitivity, the collapse of old beliefs, the feeling that you're losing your mind. Maybe you've been to doctors who found nothing wrong, tried solutions that didn't work, wondered if you're broken. You're not broken. You're breaking open. Here's what to do. First, stop pathologizing the symptoms. They're not evidence of illness. They're evidence of evolution. Your consciousness is expanding, and your body is helping, not hurting you. Second, create space. Awakening can't happen in a life that's running at full capacity. You need silence, solitude, stillness, not as luxury, but as necessity. Third, find your people. You're not meant to go through this alone. There are others experiencing this. Find them. Talk to them. Let yourself be understood. And finally, trust the process. Jung spent his entire career studying transformation, and he found one consistent truth. The psyche knows what it's doing. If you're being dismantled, it's because you're being rebuilt. If you're losing yourself, it's because you're finding yourself. The old identity has to die for the new one to be born. The caterpillar doesn't become a butterfly by addition. It becomes a butterfly by dissolution and reformation. Your body is telling you that you're ready. The 7 symptoms aren't warnings. They're invitations. The question isn't whether you're awakening. The question is whether you'll trust the process enough to let it complete. Comment below which symptom you're experiencing right now. When you name it publicly, you stop suffering alone. You join the lineage of everyone who has ever walked this path. You become part of the awakening that's happening not to you, but through you, The symptoms aren't the problem. They're the proof. You're closer than you think.